Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to This Is It, Straight Talk for the Blaxit community. I'm your host, Devin Austin, aka the Divine Miss D, and I'm here every Saturday afternoon from 12 noon to 1 p.m. right here on Blaxit Radio. We have a very special guest for you. Her name is Tina Strawn. So without further ado, let's welcome Tina to the show. Welcome, Tina.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, no problem. Looking forward to our little chat today. And to start things off, let's start off with a little introduction. Maybe you can introduce yourself to the audience, give them a little bit of background about who you are and what you're all about.
Okay, well, the way that I start describing myself is honestly in the moment. Really, I really kind of check in and see what's most present for me in this moment, which is I am a minimalist nomad. I am a queer Black woman who is divorcing America. I am an author. I'm a racial and social justice advocate and activist. I am a liberation activist. I am a podcaster. I have a podcast called Speaking of Racism, and I own something called Legacy Trips. And Legacy Trips are antiracism trips where we visit various historical locations with the purpose of utilizing spiritual practices to dismantle racism or other forms of oppression, first starting with ourselves and then moving beyond into our homes and our families and our communities. Wow. I'm a mother of 3 adult children, and I'm currently in Atlanta and counting down the days until I am out of the country. And in 14 days, I'll be back in Jamaica for my birthday to celebrate with some friends. And then 10 days from then, I'll be back in Costa Rica.
Wow, that's wonderful. Home. I was going to ask you about that because I met Tina in Costa Rica. And the next thing I know, I think you were in Mexico or something.
I was in Mexico. I visited Mexico with some friends for a birthday party in February for a few days. Yeah.
Okay. So you weren't really staying there because I thought maybe it was one of those visa border run kind of things where you had gone to Mexico. Because I know a lot of times people, when they're in Costa Rica, I'll look up and one day they'll be in Costa Rica and the next day they'll be in another country. But they tend to oftentimes stay there longer than the time that you have to stay out for a border run. So that's what I was wondering. So you went from... Okay, so you were in Costa Rica how long?
6 months.
6 months. Well, since we're talking about Costa Rica and you've been to Costa Rica, let's just talk about a little bit in the beginning about your Costa Rica experience. Can you tell me a little bit about why you came to Costa Rica? And also, was this the first place that you had lived in for, say, like a 6-month period?
So I'll answer that question first. No, this is not the first place that I've lived. When I first made my Blaxit in July of 2020, it was to Jamaica. And I lived in Jamaica for almost a year. And the way that Jamaica's visitor visas are set up is every 90 days. And then you can go to the immigration office and ask for an extension for an additional 3 months. However, the maximum amount of time that someone can be in the country of Jamaica on just a visitor visa is 6 months in a calendar year. So after I completed my 6 months in 2021, I needed somewhere to go until the next calendar year because I don't have any other citizenship or residency status in Jamaica. So I knew that I would need to find another place to be. I was planning actually on going to Curacao and spending some time in Curacao.
I've been there.
You've been there?
Uh-huh.
I've heard it's beautiful.
It is. It is beautiful. Yeah. They have a slave museum there as well.
They do.
Mm-hmm. They do.
So, well, I tell you, I have that part of the story never happened because what happened next is between leaving Jamaica and then going to Curacao, I was scheduled to be in Costa Rica for 3 weeks. And so what brought me to Costa Rica is I had scheduled some time, a personal private one-on-one retreat with my sex doula, Amina Patterson of the Atlanta Institute of Divine Femininity and Sexuality. So when I went to spend time and do some work with her during the time that I was there, which was Atenas, in the Central Valley, I fell in love with being in Costa Rica. I fell in love with that town and decided to stay. And so I canceled my trip to Curacao, and 6 months went by, and here we are. Yeah. So Costa Rica wasn't even on my radar.
Wow, that's wonderful. So, okay, so you came to Costa Rica, you stayed for the 6 months, you obviously liked it. Mm-hmm. After your 6 months was over, then you headed to the States.
Well, that brings us to right now. Yeah, no, my 6 months was over, but I came to the States, which is where I am right now. I'm where we're speaking while I'm in Atlanta. But I'm heading back. So, and I'll be signing my 6-month lease to be there for the rest of.
Now, let me ask you this question, not to put you on the spot, but obviously you like Jamaica.
I love Jamaica.
Do you like Jamaica? Do you have a preference one over the other, or no?
You know, everyone wants me to choose. Everyone's like, pick one. Yeah, you can't love both of them. Which one? Which one would you pick, Jamaica or Costa Rica?
Right.
And I think that the answer to that question for me is I love both of them. They are very different. They give very different things.
Right.
So what I will say about living in Jamaica is it was exactly what I needed when I was there, for the healing that needed to take place, the grieving that I was going through at the time. And there's always going to be a place in my heart for Jamaica. And I am accepting marriage proposals from Jamaican men so that I can get my passport, if that's, so it's just because, again, leaving every 6 months, I don't know how sustainable that would have been. Right.
Yeah, no, it's not. It gets old. I'll tell you. We did it for 2 years.
Exactly. So because of those, visa restrictions, that contributed to me going obviously to Costa Rica. Right. And the thing about Costa Rica is, and you already know this, there is nothing. I have not experienced a place as peaceful as Costa Rica. So as beautiful as Jamaica is, and it is. The experience of living in Jamaica has everything to do with the beautiful Caribbean waters and the food and the weed and the people. It's a remarkable place, but it is also a hard place to live. It's a poor country. And so I think that's important for me to say. Right. I think that also that impacted the peace that I felt upon arriving in Costa Rica. Right, so it was just this very immediate shift energetically. And that's what caused me to stay. And the visitor visa situation is different, which makes it more, feasible for me because I can every, 3 months do that border run and come right back without having that restriction of an amount of time in a calendar year.
Right. Well, we'll look forward to having you back when you get back. I wanted to pivot back, though, to something that you said earlier that I think was in your bio as well. I think it's about what do you call them? Legacy? What's your
legacy trips?
Okay. Is that sort of what you're doing in the US now? Or you're just back there for another reason? Because the reason I'm asking is because I was following you on Facebook and I saw that you were going to these African slave or whatever monuments or something that they had built now in the United States. I don't know if I've been gone so long, I didn't even know these existed. But I found them really fascinating, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about them. I don't know if it was a particular trip that you set up or it was just something that you decided to do.
Happy to talk about this because this is actually my project, my passion, my purpose in life. One of them anyway. So in 2018, I created antiracism and yoga trips. And at the time they were called Satya yoga trips. Satya is the Sanskrit word for truthfulness. And it is one of the yamas, which is a part of the 8 limbs of yoga. So basically yogic philosophy. All of that to say, I started these trips, and they are designed as 3-day weekends where we visit Montgomery. And in Montgomery, Alabama, we go to the lynching memorial, and its formal title is the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. And we also visit the Legacy Museum, From Enslavement to Mass Incarceration. And both of those are projects of the Equal Justice Initiative. Those were founded by Bryan Stevenson, who is a civil rights attorney and activist. If you've heard of the book and the movie Just Mercy with Michael B. Jordan and Jamie Foxx, right. That is a movie about Bryan Stevenson's life and his clients, some of his clients. And the reason I started these trips is because I read that book, Just Mercy, in 2018, and it had such a tremendous impact on me that I began to look into more of Bryan Stevenson's work, looked into what the Equal Justice Initiative offered and what they were about, and learned that they had this place called the Lynching Memorial and the Legacy Museum. And so I went on a discovery trip, and it was so powerful, Devin, that I decided, and I'll also say, just led by spirit and the ancestors, that this is the work that I want to do. I believe every American needs to go and visit these places, bear witness to the legacy of racial terror and violence that we have always experienced in the United States as Black folks. The lynching memorial
the pictures that you have, they brought tears to my eyes, which is the reason, kind of why I'm bringing it up now. It really stuck with me. When was that built?
In 2018. It opened in the spring of 2018.
And I don't feel bad because I left in 2016.
Yes, no,
you would think to myself, why don't I know about this? My goodness.
And that's the beautiful part, and something that I'm hoping to accomplish with Legacy Trips is to get the word out that these places exist, especially with the attack right now in the United States of CRT, critical race theory, in schools, and just the white supremacist agenda of trying to deny the true history of the nation. Right. It's important for people, and in particular adults. And what's interesting, Devin, is that the median, I'm running to, there's so much for me to share, and I just get so excited about this. So I'm trying to piece this through.
Go ahead. We have time. Go ahead.
Okay. So the median age of folks that have been on my trips is about 60, which shocked me. And what I will say is that when I started the trips in 2018, I did not plan for or have any idea that it would grow and turn into what it has become, right? I honestly, at the time, I was a fitness professional. That was my career for 15 years. I'm now retired from fitness. But I was, an aspect of my fitness career is that I was a yoga teacher. And I was getting politically activated during the 2018 midterm season. So working with local folks running for various offices, one of which I volunteered for, Stacey Abrams, for governor of Georgia when she ran the first time against Brian Kemp. She's running again, which is exciting. I also volunteered on another campaign of a local Black woman in the town where I lived here in the Atlanta area. And so all this is taking place while I'm teaching yoga classes and I'm teaching cycle classes, but I'm also holding voter registration drives, and I'm also watching what's happening because Donald Trump was president at the time. And so we're dealing with, his racism and xenophobia and all of his issues. And I'm finding my teaching bleeding into my activism, and my activism begins bleeding into my teaching, which is why I decided to create these trips and include the yoga piece, because again, as a yoga teacher, and yoga being more than just the physical postures, the Sanskrit word for that is asana. Yoga is actually not just about having a yoga butt and wearing Lululemon and doing weird postures and positions with your body. That's actually absolutely not all that yoga is. Again, yoga is, there's an 8-limb path is what they call it. And asana practice is only one of those 8 limbs. So there's 7 other components with just the ways that we live our lives. So based on my not my yoga practice. Again, I was teaching, and as a student, I decided that I would create these trips with yoga as the tool that we would use to have these difficult and courageous conversations about racism and what it looks like, how it operates today. And I really thought that the yoga piece would be what drew people, because I was already teaching classes. I was teaching hundreds of people a week in the Atlanta area. They were coming to my classes regularly to listen to what I had to say and, go through these physical experiences with me. So it seemed it seemed kind of the natural progression for me to say, well, let's go on like a yoga trip, but it's not going to be, let's go eat a 5-course meal and let's go meditate by the water. It's going to be, no, let's walk through the lynching memorial and let's look at let's trace the lines from enslavement to, and this is what Brian Stevenson says, that slavery never ended, it just changed. So let's take that, draw those lines from enslavement to mass incarceration and recognize that there's still slavery that is happening. We're still in many ways enslaved.
Yes.
And let's talk about that. And let's use our mats as that tool of self-reflection. Let's use the ways that we move our body. Let's use our breath. Let's use our meditation and our ability to turn inward. The Sanskrit word for that is pratyahara. And so it is like, the most unconventional of yoga trips, because it's not this fun, let's go, do, which I love yoga retreats. It's just, that's not what this is. It was just, yoga was at the time the spiritual practice that had impacted and changed my life. So that's what I wanted to use on my trips. And now yoga is not a central factor anymore, but to speak to what you were referring to as you were following me on Facebook and you see me going to these different places, the trips have evolved and grown over these past 3 years, so that now we go to multiple locations. We don't just spend time in Montgomery. That is still a part. That's always going to be a part. But we also now go to Selma, and we will eventually probably add on Tuskegee as well. And that is the reason that I'm in the States right now, is I came back because the upcoming 2 weekends are our 13th and our 14th legacy trip. And I'm going to be there to help pull those off, because when I live abroad, I have a team in the States that runs the trips. So this was my opportunity to come back and just do some more work and decide and really put together and organize what legacy trips are going to look like moving into the future.
Wow, that is very exciting and innovative. Wow, I did not know you were doing that. I know that you had gone back to the States. I thought that you just happened to show, to go to these places because you were there. I had no idea that this was actually a formalized project of yours that you had. That this is amazing. So now let me ask you this: how often do you have the trips?
So I was running the trips every other month when I started them. So started in 2018, went through 2019. And to be honest, because I was doing them so often, and I was living in Atlanta at the time with my wife and kids, and also then we had moved to Texas. And I realized after, I think, running about 5 or 6 of the trips, I realized that it was not sustainable for me to continue to go back and forth every other month. It was very taxing physically, but it was more taxing emotionally, right? My trips are open to everyone, but the reality is the majority of folks that come on my trips are white people, white folks who, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and they are the ones who are on their own personal anti-racism journey, and that's why it's also interesting, because I've had 60 and 70-year-olds on the trip, not just 1 or 2. I've had several, which is why the median age for the legacy trip participant is 60. I've had college students be on these trips with us, and I've also had folks in their 70s. So, which is a beautiful thing when these white folks in particular that have a desire to be anti-racist and want to really understand some of the history that they were never exposed to, right? As Black folks, we grow up in Black homes and in Black communities. So we
in Black
know,
skin.
and in Black skin, exactly. So we know our history. We hear all of the stories from our grandparents and our aunts and uncles, right? So there are things that we already just know intuitively from and ancestrally, but these white folks, many of them have no idea. They just don't have an idea. So
what kind of reactions do they have?
Shock and shame would be they're surprised.
Amazing.
They're surprised that they did not know that these things took place. Both the memorial and the museum are very powerful places. The memorial is set up kind of like, it's an outdoor space. It's very lovely. There are gardens, and it is 4,400 large iron pillars. And on those iron pillars, there are names and dates inscribed, along with the counties where Black folks were lynched, where we have documentation that Black folks were lynched between the years of 1877 and 1950. And while we do know some names, of course, we will never know all of the names of the folks who were lynched. We will never know all of the stories. So you're walking through these pillars, and there are also different points where you can see reasons why Black folks were lynched. And this is the kind of experience that when these white folks coming on my trips go through, it's shocking for them, and it's also, they feel ashamed.
Yeah.
And so I will say that shame is not a useful emotion when it comes to, moving from a place of non-action into a place of action. So, we work through some of that, and that's why the weekend is a container, right, where we spend time setting it up. So when folks register for these trips, they immediately get what I call soul assignments. So they get kind of a list of books to read, documentaries to watch, podcasts to listen to give them a foundation for what they're going to experience and kind of prepare them for this journey, right? So that by the time we're together for these 3 days, and we meet on Friday nights, and we kind of ground ourselves in some community guidelines, and we ground ourselves in gratitude, and we ground ourselves in community, right? We are all a part of, this is the American story. While it is focused and centered on the Black experience in the United States, this is American history. And the sad reality is there are too many white folks that don't even know. They don't have an idea, which is why they don't understand the current new civil rights movement. They don't understand Black Lives Matter because they don't understand how historically slavery has not gone away. It's just changed. And that's why we are dealing with and experiencing what we're experiencing now.
Wow. I love it. Let me just ask you one more question about this. I could talk about this all day.
Me too.
The 3 days, you meet for the 3 days, and then because you're going to different places. So you meet in one place, maybe everyone is staying like at the same hotel or something, you're together. And then are you just like traveling in a bus or something to the different locations? Like what happens when you get together as a group?
So it's an all-inclusive weekend. So it includes everything such as your hotel accommodations as well as transportation. So my team takes care of moving us from one spot to the other. And I'll just say also, we're a startup. So, and like I said, when I started them and realized I couldn't keep doing them by myself, that is when I made the decision to not be the only one who's facilitating. So now I partner with a variety of different anti-racism educators and racial justice leaders. Okay. So they're the ones that facilitate it. It's still my content, my curriculum, for lack of a better term. Sometimes they include their own as well, but it is a situation where when people register, they're a part of the trip. And so, we're all at the same hotel. We all move from one spot to the next, and we travel together.
Where's it started?
Montgomery.
Okay. No, I'm just wondering because it's so fascinating to me. And I'm going to be making a trip back to the States because I'm going to be tracing those people that I told you about in Alabama. And while I'm there, this might be something that I might be able to work around so that I can go on the trip, because I told you I found it fascinating. And I think it's something that more people should know about. I'd like to be able to promote it, to other people as well, because I think it's totally worthwhile. and something that's necessary for people and for growth, you know, in America. So that's one of the reasons why I was asking. So I'll get with you on the side and get, you know, some additional information. But thank you so much for explaining that that part of it, because like I said, I was practically in tears. I was watching you, you know, and I think it was where you were standing by the pillars or walking from one to the other with the different people that had been lynched.
It's a very emotional trip. We all do a lot of crying. Yeah. Our next one is in October. So I don't know when you're planning.
In October. Okay. That's good to know. Good to know. Okay. So now let's talk about your other love. Well, you've named a lot of things that you love, but let's talk about one of your loves, which is writing, because I know you have a book, a new book that's coming out. As a matter of fact, I did the pre-order for Amazon. So I'm going to be waiting to get my copy of the book. But this is not your first book, right?
It's my first solo book. So I'm a contributing author to an anthology that came out in 2020. And that book is called Check Your Privilege, Lean into the Discomfort. And in that book, I write a chapter about being comfortable in both Black and white spaces. So that is, you know, still along the same racial justice lines of each of the authors of that book who contributed a chapter. It is an anti-racism book for folks that are looking to show up in their lives in an anti-racist way.
Okay, so then so let's talk about this book. Tell me the title of the book, and tell us the title of the book. And then tell me a little bit about what the title stands for, what it represents, and then just tell us a little bit about why you wrote the book and what the book is about.
Oh,
in your own words and in your own way.
It's funny because I've been doing nothing but eating, sleeping, and breathing this book for the past year and a half, and I still kind of get emotional thinking about it and talking about it. The title of the book is Are We Free Yet? The Black Queer Guide to Divorcing America.
Love the title.
Thank you. I love it too. And that title hits you in the face immediately. And the book is, I guess I'll kind of give the elevator pitch.
Okay.
It is both a personal reflection and a collective examination of our relationship with systems of oppression, such as white supremacy, capitalism, and the patriarchy, while centering our tools for liberation, such as healing, grieving and healing, peace and pleasure, joy and celebration. So it is literally a memoir style guidebook about my journey as, again, a queer Black American woman who has both an ex-husband of 11 years, an ex-wife of almost 8 years, and now becoming a nomad and Blaxiting and divorcing America.
Wow. Something else. So tell me a little bit about your the whole process of putting the book together. Like, did all of a sudden one day you just thought, oh, I think I'm just going to write a book about getting out of America, and sat down and write the book? What kind of was going on in your head that made you decide that this was something that you wanted to write about, or something that you thought was really necessary, a necessary book to have out there for other people as a reference?
Yeah. So I have to say that the beginning of this book came as a result of going through one of the reasons. There were many points in my life where I can point to and say, yeah, these, and I talk about this in the book. One of the things was the midterm elections of 2018, again, having volunteered on the Stacey Abrams campaign. And I was also one of the people that chased ballots for the 10 days after the election was over. And so, you know, for folks who know about the what happened and what took place in Georgia during that gubernatorial election, that was eye-opening for me. In addition to the fact that I began my own personal racial awakening journey in July of 2016, when I accidentally saw the videos of Philando Castile and Alton Sterling being killed by police. And that shocked me and broke me in a way that I just have never been the same. So as I was going on my path of racial awakening and also political activation, I eventually landed in a place where I was like, I want to leave the country, which was somewhere 2018, 2019. So all of this to say, by the time the end of 2019 came, there were a series of things that were taking place in my life personally. For example, my wife and I were living in Texas, renting a house. We discovered that the owners of the house were not paying the mortgage, even though we were paying our rent every month on time. So we were facing a difficult situation of losing all of the money we had been paying rent for, and in addition to having the house taken away from us because it was going to go into foreclosure, and just realizing that a lot of the systems and the things that were in place that allegedly are supposed to provide us protection actually aren't. They're, feeling very vulnerable, that we were doing all of these things that we were promised would produce a good life, right? We were doing the things, working the jobs and following these rules, just to realize that there were still so many variables that put our lives at risk, and just wanting to just be done. Right. So I decided, so my wife and I at the time decided that we would start planning our Blaxit. And that's when we kind of got into the Blaxit groups that are online, and started doing some research. And the research initially had us wanting to go to Vietnam, because I had been following some of the Black expats that were creating community in Vietnam.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that was the initial place where we were going to go. And then I was asked to do some work, racial justice work, in Durban, South Africa. So that was the next place where we were shifting to make our move, because that trip was going to be paid for. So it was like, well, if we're going to go all the way to Durban, South Africa, maybe that could be our first location where we Blaxit. Right. And so we actually started chronicling our journey, and we did one podcast episode in January of 2020, because that was when we were executing this Blaxit plan for the first time. Right. But then, as you know, what happened in March is that COVID came and shut everything down. Exactly. And so that eliminated Vietnam, that eliminated Durban, because that work got canceled. And we things would then kind of go from there in terms of, we got separated. She left out of the blue. George Floyd was killed, and I began to spiral. And that's what led to me going to Jamaica. Yeah. And so that's how the story began. So when you ask what made you decide to write about this, it was recognizing that when we decided that we wanted to leave the States, we wanted to we wanted to document what that process looked like. And I just had no idea that after getting rid of everything, because again, as a nomad, what we did was got rid of the house that we were renting, we left, got rid of all of our belongings, sold everything, gave it away, threw things away, and had nothing but our suitcases. And we were going to just travel. 2020 started out where we were just going to travel the States for the first 9 months of the year, because I had speaking engagements all throughout the country. And so we were just going to go from state to state with my work. But then again, when COVID hit and everything shut down, the work also went away. Right. I had no idea what would then take place next. And that led to all of the things that now it's why I find myself in Jamaica and find myself grieving and healing and having this story to tell. And to kind of add a little bit more as far as how the book came about, it actually is, because I'll be honest, Devin, all I was doing in Jamaica, well, a lot of what I was doing was just crying and smoking a lot of weed and being at the beach. That's, you know what I'm saying? I was heartbroken that my wife has left me. I don't understand why, and I just wanted to be, like, live like a hippie, basically, Right. And I'm a woo-woo person. So the life that I live today, not unlike the life that I've always lived, is just by faith. And so I will tell you, I received 2 book offers, and I never wrote a book proposal. I never submitted anything to anyone. Both publishers came to me. And they came to me, I think, at a time when the country in particular and the world was focusing on racism for a moment, right? Because remember the summer of 2020 and all of the uprisings in the street as a result of George Floyd being killed. That I think put a spotlight, well, I know it did, put a spotlight on my work and the work of so many others who have been doing racial justice work and advocacy. So it brought light to my podcast, Speaking of Racism. And the first publisher reached out to me and asked if I would write a book about how to be a social justice advocate. But the terms of that contract were very inequitable. So in my mind, I'm like, did you seriously just ask a queer Black woman to write a book and you're going to pay me pennies and I'm not going to get royalties, and you want me to write this book that's going to become a bestseller and walk away from it and you're going to make all the money and I don't own the right? It was a really ridiculous offer. So right. But to be honest, I think the offer was it was called what's the term? And this is just good information for all the writers out there, contract for hire. That's not the right term, but there's a term where basically it is this one project that you do. They give you, you write the book and then you basically, they own everything else. Right. Yeah,
you do exactly. The work and they get the glory of the money.
So it's a lump sum. It was a lump sum of, I think the offer was like $7,000. And to be honest, I was not in a position to turn down $7,000. That's not how it rolls over here. Right. The way my bank account is set up, I'm always open to receiving. If anybody wants to just drop me $7,000, I'll take it.
Right.
The issue for me was, yeah, but there's not any equity in this. And I'm not, this is the system that I'm working to dismantle. This is the activism piece. I don't just talk shit on social media. I actually believe what I'm talking about. So I'm not going to participate in this way. And not to say that had I taken it, it would have been a bad decision or would have been wrong. This just speaks to the amount of faith that I have. And I knew that the story that I had to share and tell the world was worth more than what they were offering me. 30 days later, Row House Publishing comes knocking and says, we want to publish your story. Are we free yet? And that was now they were talking $40,000. Now we're talking about 40% royalties. Right. And I'm like, that's the one.
That's right. Because there are no coincidences, right?
There are no coincidences.
Wow, that's wonderful. Well, tell me this. What did you find was the hardest part of actually writing the book? Since I've never written a book before, but are there, like, when you're writing a book, are there parts that are like, they just come to you and they're very easy, and then there's parts that you get to that you struggle with to get the words out on paper?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what do you think was the hardest part of this particular book?
Well, I think for me, the hardest part was the fact that I'm writing a memoir at age 44.
Right.
So that, still
got a lot of years to go.
Yeah, I have a lot of years to go, and it's very vulnerable. It's incredibly raw. I talk about my grandparents. I talk about my marriage to my ex-husband. I talk about my marriage to my ex-wife. I talk about my kids. And some difficulties that my oldest daughter went through in 2020, but in great detail. I talk about 4 of my lovers that I had over the course of a couple of years after my wife left me. I talk about I talk about HR 40 and some of the legislation that is currently up for, and actually very interesting, there's a part where I talk about the Emmett Till anti-lynching bill. And when I was writing that piece, it had not been passed. It has finally passed after 200 years and multiple attempts to pass. It finally did pass. And now we're just waiting on President Joe Biden to sign an executive order to make to pass HR 40, which is the commission to study and develop reparations for African Americans. And we're hoping that he does that this weekend, Juneteenth, which is also known right now as Reparations and Racial Justice Day, because that's what we are asking for. We actually never asked for Juneteenth to be a national holiday. We actually just want equity and equality and reparations. So,
is there going to be an announcement or anything regarding it, or is it either he's just going to do it or it's just going to?
It will be an announcement. Apparently, he had a whole the Biden plan for Black America, which I think is called Lift Every Voice or something. And in that, when he was running for president,
I remember when he was running.
Yeah, he talks about reparations. So we are absolutely applying pressure. We're asking everyone to apply pressure to their representatives and Congress folks to ask him to make good on his own words and his own promises, what he said he would do. Right. We see all this other legislation getting passed, anti-Asian hate bills. Yeah. Those are important. Yeah. Those are important and necessary. And we see all the money gets sent over to the Ukraine. Okay.
Yeah, also lots of money to the Ukraine.
So much money. So the issue now is, okay, it's beyond time for Black folks in our reparations. And so this is the time. Yeah. So all of this is in the book as well. So to answer your question, to go back to what the hardest part is, it was for me, it was pulling all of these pieces together to talk about my activism, my parenting, my marriage, being someone who is solo poly pansexual and what that means in this queer Black body, but that is also straight presenting. So people don't know that is a part of my identity, that I'm a part of the LGBTQ plus community, and happy Pride, by the way, it's June. Like people don't know that about me until you get to know me. As soon as you talk to me, you know, because I make that clear because it's important to be represented and for folks to see this is just I'm just a normal person. I just have kind of some extraordinary stories to tell. Right.
Well, then on the flip side of what was the hardest thing, then what was the part that was the most fun for you to write in the book?
Was there fun in writing this book? Let me think. I think writing about the pleasure pieces. So the book is organized into 4 parts. The first part is grieving and healing. And when I do all of the readings of the book that I've had to do in the editing process, that is the part of the book that I cry through every time, because I talk about Emmett Till and his mother, and I talk about Trayvon Martin. I talk about the new civil rights movement. I sat in the murder trial for Amber Geiger, who is the Dallas police officer who killed a young Black man in Dallas. His name was Botham Jean. And I sat in that murder trial back in 2019, and I talk about that experience. And so I talk about how this book has both writing it broke my heart, and that's kind of the grieving and the healing piece, but it also put my heart back together, put me back together. And so then the next couple of parts of the book are peace and pleasure, joy and celebration, and then finally activism and liberation. And so, yeah, the fun parts about the book is just thinking about my time in Jamaica. Like I said, hanging out with the Jamaican folk and smoking a lot of weed and listening to music. And
now that you're not crying anymore, you can look back on that.
Exactly. They're still crying. Right. They're still crying, but that probably was the most fun parts for me to write.
Now, okay, so now we've done that. Are there any other projects or anything that you have in the works that you would like to tell us about today?
I think the most exciting thing is that my whole life are these 2 things, this book and legacy trips, and we are bringing them together. So for the book launch is going to take place in Jamaica. And so we are preparing a legacy trip, Are We Free Yet series. And the book launch is going to actually take place in Montego Bay, Jamaica, which is where the majority of the writing took place and the majority of my grieving and healing took place. We will also be doing a legacy trip in Costa Rica, and that will also have,
really?
Yes, we're working on that as well. And so that's what I'm working on, is putting together the 2023 legacy trip calendar, as well as my book tour and the events that will be associated when the book comes out, January 17th of 2023.
Okay, so now tell us how we can get the book.
Okay. Amazon and Barnes & Noble right now. You can pre-sale it. You can you pre-order it on pre-sale.
And then how do we get in touch with you if we want to follow you, we want to find out about the trips, and just what's going on? Do you, a podcast, email, Instagram, Facebook? How do we reach you on social media so that we can follow you and stay up to date on exactly what's going on with all of these trips and book launches and
all the things, all the things. Absolutely. Right. The first place I'll point everyone to is Instagram. My personal Instagram is Tina_Strawn_life.
Okay.
And then also on Instagram, I'm at Speaking of Racism. That's the podcast platform. Also on Instagram is Legacy Trips. And that's where there's more information, obviously, about legacy trips. And folks can also visit my website at tina-strawn.com.
Wow. Thank you so much, Tina. I have totally enjoyed this interview with you today. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and talk with me. And in closing, just because we have a lot of people out there that are like, want to write or be authors or whatever, what words of advice would you give to someone who maybe is thinking about writing their first book?
3 quick things. Get a writing coach.
Okay.
Join a writing group.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Listen to Anne Lamott's book on audio, Bird by Bird.
Bird by Bird. Okay. Well, I'll be sure to put that information down. We have it now for Blaxit Radio, and for when this goes live on YouTube, I'll be sure to put that in the description box, along with all of your contact information and the rest. And I wish you much success with the book. I can't wait to get my copy. I can't wait to dive in and get some more information on this legacy trip too, because I'm really interested in taking it. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and talk with me today. And I will see you when you get back to Costa Rica.
Thank you, Devin. I appreciate the invitation. And I'll see you, in a couple of weeks.
You're welcome. Thank you, Tina.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.